The twin suns of Valoria dawned over the alien training compound, casting a golden hue across the rugged terrain. To the Valorian military, mornings were a time of strategic meditation and calculated preparation. Yet today, their focus was on one peculiar figure standing alone atop a nearby ridge. Commander Thaler watched intently, his elongated, emerald eyes narrowing as he observed the human through his hollow binoculars. The human, known simply as Carter, stood motionless, his posture relaxed, hands by his sides. To the untrained eye, he seemed to be admiring the sunrise. "What is he doing?" muttered Thaler, his second-in-command, Vela, stepping up beside him. "He calls it relaxing," she replied, her voice laced with skepticism. "It's a daily routine for him. Claims it clears his mind." Thaler scoffed, his scaled lips curling into a smirk. Deathworlders, always so strange. To the Valorians, whose society thrived on structure and discipline, the idea of relaxing was as foreign as the chaotic world from which Carter hailed. Earth, a place of relentless storms, predatory beasts, and treacherous landscapes. Only a Deathworlder could survive such a place, let alone thrive. But as the Valorians continued to observe, Carter's demeanor shifted. His body tensed, his stance widening. With a sudden burst of movement, he dropped low, his muscles coiled like springs. In a heartbeat, he exploded into action. Carter's movements were a blur. Swift, calculated, and impossibly precise. Each punch cut through the air with a sonic crack, his kicks whipping around with lethal force. Dust and gravel flew beneath his feet as he maneuvered with agility far surpassing anything the Valorians had witnessed. What is this?" Vela's voice trembled, a hint of fear creeping into her tone. Thaler's fingers tightened around the binoculars, his pulse quickening. Carter moved with the fluidity of water yet struck with the force of a tempest. His strikes were not random but calculated, each motion flowed into the next, forming a seamless dance of destruction. A dance perfected on a world designed to kill. As the suns continued to rise, their light revealed the ferocity etched on Carter's face, eyes focused, jaw clenched. This was no simple routine. It was battle training, honed through survival against the deadliest creatures in the galaxy. Thaler's smirk vanished, replaced by unease. He realized now why Earth was called a death world. It wasn't just the environment that was deadly, it was the beings who conquered it. He does this every morning?" Thaler's voice wavered. Vela nodded, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Every single morning. He calls it relaxing." Thaler swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving Carter. The human continued his routine, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that he was being watched. Thaler shivered, a chill running down his spine despite the warmth of the suns. If this was Carter's idea of relaxation, what did his combat look like? The training grounds buzzed with activity as Valorian soldiers practiced their drills in precise formation. Their synchronized movements were flawless, a testament to years of rigorous discipline. Yet, whispers rippled through the ranks, eyes frequently darting toward the human standing alone at the edge of the field. Carter was focused, hands wrapped in worn, leather bindings as he stretched his arms, rotating his shoulders with ease. His relaxed demeanor was a stark contrast to the rigid posture of the Valorians. Despite his calm exterior, his eyes held a sharpness, a readiness to spring into action at a moment's notice. Commander Thaler approached, his authority evident as the soldiers straightened instinctively. His eyes were fixed on Carter, a mix of curiosity and caution swirling within his emerald gaze. He had seen the human's morning routine, witnessed the raw power and precision. But he needed to understand it firsthand. "Human," Thaler's voice boomed, commanding attention. Carter glanced over his shoulder, his lips curling into a casual smile. "Morning, Commander." Thaler's eyes narrowed. "I have heard much about your unique training methods. I wish to see them up close." He gestured to the sparring arena at the center of the grounds. A demonstration, perhaps? The surrounding soldiers exchanged curious glances, their excitement barely contained. A duel between their commander and the Deathworlder? This was unprecedented. Carter's smile widened, a playful glint in his eyes. You sure? I wouldn't want to embarrass you in front of your men. A ripple of gasps echoed through the crowd. No one dared to speak to Thaler like that. But instead of anger, Thaler's mouth curved into a grin. Confident, aren't we? His eyes gleamed with challenge. Let's see if that confidence is earned. They entered the sparring circle, the Valerian soldiers forming a wide ring around them. The air was electric with anticipation. Carter rolled his neck, loosening his muscles as Thaler removed his ornate cape, revealing lean, sinewy arms lined with scars from countless battles. The rules are simple, Thaler announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. No weapons. Hand-to-hand combat until one yields or can no longer continue. Carter's stance shifted, his feet planted firmly, shoulders relaxed. He looked at Thaler, his gaze unwavering. Sounds fair. Thaler lunged, his movements swift and calculated. He was faster than Carter expected, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. His fist shot forward, aimed at Carter's midsection. But Carter's body reacted instinctively, twisting just enough to let the blow graze past him. Thaler's eyes widened in surprise. He recovered quickly, launching a flurry of strikes with remarkable speed. Yet, each punch met only air as Carter dodged with fluid grace, his body bending and weaving effortlessly. The crowd murmured in awe, their commander's attacks were legendary, known for their precision and power. But the human moved like water, slipping through the gaps with ease. Thaler's frustration grew, his strikes becoming more aggressive. But Carter remained calm, his expression almost bored as he continued to evade each attack. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, Carter countered. His fist shot out, connecting with Thaler's chest. The impact was explosive, sending the Valerian commander skidding backward, his feet digging trenches into the dirt. The crowd gasped, shock rippling through their ranks. Their commander had been hit, no, launched, by a single punch. Thaler's chest heaved as he caught his breath, his eyes wide with disbelief. The power behind that strike, it was unlike anything he'd ever felt. He looked up to find Carter standing calmly, his stance unchanged, his breathing steady. You're strong, Carter admitted, his voice casual. Fast too. But you're too stiff. You rely too much on form and not enough on flow. Thaler's fists tightened, his pride stung. But beneath his frustration was a growing respect. The human was right. Valerian combat was rigid, disciplined, but predictable. Carter's style was wild, adaptive, deadly. With a deep breath, Thaler steadied himself, his eyes blazing with determination. Again, he shouted, charging forward. This time, his movements were more erratic, less calculated. He tried to mimic Carter's unpredictability, breaking his rhythm to throw off the human's timing. For a moment, it seemed to work. His fist grazed Carter's shoulder, his kick forcing Carter to shift his stance. But Carter's grin widened. Not bad, he teased. You learn fast. Then he moved. His speed was terrifying, closing the gap before Thaler could react. His elbow drove into Thaler's midsection, knocking the wind out of him. Before he could recover, Carter's leg swept beneath him, sending him crashing to the ground. Dust billowed as Thaler landed hard, the air forced from his lungs. He looked up, vision blurred, to see Carter standing over him, his hand extended. Relax, Commander, Carter said, his tone friendly. That was just a warm-up. Thaler stared at the outstretched hand, his pride warring with his respect. Finally, he grasped Carter's wrist, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. The crowd was silent, their disbelief palpable. No one had ever defeated Commander Thaler. Yet here stood the human, grinning as if it were all a game. Thaler's chest tightened, a mix of admiration and fear swirling within him. This Deathworlder was unlike any warrior he'd ever faced. And this was just his idea of relaxation. The air in the training grounds was thick with astonishment as Carter and Thaler stood amidst a stunned crowd of Valerian soldiers. Whispers surged through the ranks, disbelief evident in every gaze fixed on the human who had just bested their commander. Carter dusted his hands off, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere. Thaler's chest still heaved from the intense duel, but his expression had shifted from shock to a grudging respect. "I've never seen anyone move like that," Thaler admitted, his voice low enough for only Carter to hear. "Your style, it's wild, unpredictable." Carter's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Where I come from, you either adapt or you don't survive. We don't have the luxury of rigid forms and set patterns. Every fight is different." Thaler's jaw tightened. He understood the underlying message: the human's world was harsher, deadlier. It demanded a level of flexibility that Valerian discipline didn't allow. It was a truth he found difficult to accept, yet he couldn't deny the evidence before him. Before he could respond, a stern voice cut through the murmurs. "Commander Thaler, explain yourself." The crowd parted swiftly, revealing an imposing figure striding toward them. His armor gleamed under the sunlight, adorned with intricate insignias that marked his rank: General Kale, one of Valoria's most revered war leaders. His sharp gaze flicked between Thaler and Carter, his eyes narrowing. "A sparring match, General," Thaler replied, his tone respectful but steady. "I wish to understand the human's capabilities firsthand." Kale's eyes locked onto Carter, his expression unreadable. "And did you find what you were looking for?" Thaler hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "More than I expected." Kale's lips pressed into a thin line. He stepped closer to Carter, his towering presence meant to intimidate. But Carter met his gaze evenly, his relaxed stance unwavering. "So, you're the Deathworlder," Kale stated, his voice heavy with skepticism. "The human who survived the front lines." Carter's smile was disarming. "That's me. But you can just call me Carter." A muscle twitched in Kale's jaw. The human's lack of formality was either ignorance or arrogance. He wasn't sure which was worse. "Your kind is known for being reckless. Undisciplined. I see now why they call you dangerous." Carter's eyes hardened, his playful demeanor fading. "We do what we have to. On Earth, the only rule is survival. You learn to fight smart, or you don't get back up." Kale's gaze lingered on him, analyzing every detail. There was no boastfulness in the human's words, only cold, hard truth. It was unsettling. After a long pause, Kale's expression softened, his curiosity overriding his skepticism. "Your methods are unconventional, but effective. Perhaps there is value in learning from you." Thaler's eyes widened. "General, you can't mean—" "I do," Kale interrupted, his tone firm. "Our soldiers are prepared for predictable enemies. Disciplined armies that follow patterns. But the Scalari are anything but predictable. They fight like wild beasts, without honor or order. We need to adapt, or we will be overrun." He turned back to Carter, his stance commanding respect. "Human, if you are willing, I want you to train my soldiers. Teach them your ways, how to be unpredictable, how to adapt on the battlefield." The crowd erupted in murmurs, shock rippling through the ranks. A Deathworlder, training Valerian warriors? It was unheard of. Yet the logic was undeniable. If they wanted to survive the Scalari onslaught, they needed to learn how to fight without rules. Carter's expression softened, a hint of respect entering his gaze. "You're not as rigid as I thought, General." Kale's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. War teaches even the proudest to bend. Carter folded his arms, his posture thoughtful. All right. I'll teach them. But understand this, my methods aren't pretty. There's no honor in them. Just survival. Cale's eyes darkened. Honor is a luxury we can no longer afford. Victory is all that matters. The two warriors stood in silence, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were different, worlds apart. Yet, they shared the same goal, to protect their people, no matter the cost. Thaler stepped forward, his voice hesitant. General, are you certain of this? Letting an outsider, a Deathworlder, influence our forces? Cale's gaze never wavered. Desperate times call for desperate measures. If we are to survive, we must become as unpredictable as our enemy. Carter will show us how. Turning to face the gathered soldiers, Cale's voice rose, commanding authority. From this day forward, you will learn from the Deathworlder. You will master his methods, no matter how foreign they seem. Adapt, or perish. That is the only choice we have. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances but stood firm, their loyalty unshaken. They were warriors, after all. They would follow orders, even if it meant learning from a human. Carter looked around, his gaze lingering on their faces, young, determined, disciplined. They reminded him of soldiers back home, faces he could never forget. A pang of sadness flickered in his eyes before he buried it beneath his usual grin. All right, Valorians, he called out, his voice echoing through the grounds. Lesson 1, forget everything you know about fighting. The crowd went silent, their confusion evident. Carter's smile widened, a mischievous glint in his eyes. We're going to start from scratch. And by the end of this, you won't just fight like warriors, you'll fight like survivors. Thaler watched in awe as Carter's presence filled the grounds, his confidence contagious. For the first time, he felt a sliver of hope, a belief that they could actually win this war. But beneath his admiration was a lingering fear. If a single human possessed this much power, how many more were out there? And what would happen if they ever became enemies? The Valerian training grounds, once filled with the synchronized clashing of swords and precise formations, were now in chaos. Soldiers stumbled over each other, their rigid stances failing them as Carter barked commands, his tone sharp yet oddly encouraging. Stop thinking like soldiers, he shouted, pacing between the bewildered warriors. The Scalari don't fight fair. They don't follow rules. If you want to survive, you need to be faster, smarter, unpredictable. He watched as the soldiers struggled, their disciplined minds resisting the concept of disorder. Thaler stood nearby, arms crossed, his face a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Carter grabbed a spear from a nearby rack, twirling it with effortless agility. Your enemies expect you to follow patterns. They anticipate every move because they've seen it all before. But if you throw something unexpected at them, he suddenly flipped the spear, striking the ground behind him without looking. A young soldier yelped, stumbling back just as the spear's tip stopped an inch from his chest. The crowd went silent, eyes wide. The move had been flawless, executed without even a glance. Carter's gaze never left the soldiers, his voice calm. They won't know how to react. The young warrior's face turned red, shame and admiration battling for dominance. Carter smiled, lowering the spear. Good reflexes. But you hesitated. In a real fight, that's the difference between life and death. The soldier swallowed, nodding vigorously. Yes, sir. Carter's expression softened. No, sir. Just Carter. I'm not your commander. I'm your survival coach. Laughter rippled through the ranks, tension easing just a bit. Carter's unconventional style was strange, but his confidence was infectious. Thaler stepped forward, his arms still crossed. You're turning them into rogues, he observed, his tone guarded. We are warriors, not bandits. Carter's eyes met his, unwavering. I'm turning them into survivors. War isn't about honor, Thaler. It's about living to see another day. Thaler's jaw tightened. You speak as if you've lost all hope in valor. Carter's gaze darkened, a shadow passing over his face. I've seen too many good men die because they fought with honor instead of instinct. Your enemy doesn't care about your codes. They only care about victory. His words hung heavy in the air, the weight of his experiences palpable. Thaler felt a chill run through him, realizing just how much this human had endured. Before he could respond, a trumpet blared from the fortress walls, its sharp note echoing across the grounds. A messenger ran up, his face pale. Commander Thaler. Scolari raiders have been spotted at the western border. Gasps erupted among the soldiers. The Scolari hadn't attacked in weeks. This was sudden, unexpected. Thaler's demeanor shifted instantly, his voice authoritative. How many? A scouting party, no more than 20. But they're moving fast, burning everything in their path. Thaler clenched his fists. Ready the troops. We'll intercept them before they reach the villages. Carter's eyes narrowed. You're going to engage them head-on? Thaler shot him a defiant look. We are warriors. We confront our enemies, not skulk around like cowards. Carter's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp. They're baiting you. 20 raiders are nothing. They want you to send your forces out, leave the fortress vulnerable. Thaler's face hardened. You doubt my strategy? I've seen it before. It's how you draw out your enemy's strongest warriors, and ambush them when they're isolated. Carter's tone was calm, his words blunt. If you fall for this, they'll wipe out your best fighters and march straight here. The soldiers murmured nervously, realizing the cunning behind the Scolari's tactic. Thaler's eyes flicked to the horizon, his pride warring with reason. He knew Carter was right, but admitting it meant conceding that his enemy was smarter than he had believed. Carter took a step closer, his voice low but firm. You want to fight with honor, fine. But fight smart. Let me handle this. Thaler's eyes widened. You? Carter's lips curved into a daring grin. They're expecting Valerian soldiers. Disciplined, predictable. They won't be ready for me. Thaler hesitated, glancing at his men. They were brave, loyal, but unprepared for the kind of cunning Carter described. He hated the idea of relying on an outsider, a Deathworlder, to protect his people. Yet, he couldn't deny the logic. After a long pause, Thaler's shoulders sagged in reluctant acceptance. Fine. But I'm coming with you. I won't let a human fight my battles for me. Carter's grin widened. Wouldn't have it any other way. He turned to the assembled soldiers, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. All right, listen up. This is your first lesson in fighting dirty. We're going to hit them fast, confuse them, and get out before they even know what happened. No formations. No signals. Just pure chaos. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, but their eyes were alight with curiosity. This was unlike any battle plan they'd ever heard. Carter's voice dropped to a commanding growl. If you want to survive, you have to think like your enemy. Be ruthless. Be unpredictable. And most importantly, never let them see you coming. A spark ignited in the troops, their fear replaced with excitement. This wasn't just training. This was a revolution in warfare. Thaler watched, his skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging respect. Carter was dangerous, no doubt. But perhaps, just perhaps, he was exactly what they needed. As they moved out, preparing for the ambush, Thaler felt a strange surge of hope. If this human's madness could defeat the Scolari, then maybe there was a chance after all. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Carter's arrival would change Valoria forever, in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The air was thick with tension as the group of Valerian soldiers, led by Carter and Thaler, crept through the dense forest bordering the western edge of the kingdom. The trees whispered as the wind passed through them, an eerie soundtrack to the silence that enveloped them. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving only the faint glow of twilight. Carter motioned for them to halt, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. He could feel the weight of his own heartbeat, a reminder that the plan, while bold, carried its risks. There was no room for hesitation now. They had to move fast, and most importantly, stay unseen. Thaler, though still wary of Carter's unorthodox methods, couldn't deny the efficiency with which the human had prepared them. The soldiers, once hesitant and unsure, now moved with confidence, instinctively adopting the methods Carter had drilled into them. They had learned to keep their movements silent, their presence undetected. "Stay low, stay quiet," Carter murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it held an intensity that spread to the troops around him. The ambush site was close. They'd chosen a narrow pass between two large cliffs, a natural bottleneck ere the Scolari raiders would be forced to slow down. Perfect for a surprise attack. Suddenly, the familiar sound of the Scolari raiders' boots crunching the underbrush reached Carter's ears. He raised a hand, signaling for the troops to remain still. He could see the silhouettes of the raiders ahead, no more than 20, just as the messenger had reported. But something felt off. Carter's instincts, honed from years of surviving on a hostile world, were screaming at him. There was something about this ambush that didn't sit right. Thaler noticed Carter's tense posture and narrowed his eyes. "What's wrong?" he whispered, his voice edged with concern. "Something's not right," Carter replied, his gaze fixed on the approaching raiders. "They're too calm. They're walking right into our trap, almost like they know it's coming." Before Thaler could respond, the unmistakable sound of a Scolari's low growl rang out in the distance. Carter's hand shot up, signaling for everyone to stay still. The soldiers held their breath, the weight of their surroundings heavy in their chests. The raiders stopped dead in their tracks, then began moving with sudden urgency. It was clear they had realized they had been spotted, but it was too late. Carter had already set the trap. "On my mark," he said quietly, his eyes trained on the enemy. The soldiers prepared themselves, their hearts thundering in their chests. Every part of them screamed to act, to fight. But Carter's icy calmness kept them in check. Then, without warning, Carter leaped forward, a blur of motion, and the battle began. His spear cut through the air like a lightning bolt, striking one of the Scolari raiders with such speed that the creature didn't even have time to react before it crumpled to the ground. The soldiers followed suit, rushing forward to meet the raiders with practiced precision. But the raiders weren't just reacting to the ambush, they were fighting back with a ferocity that Carter hadn't anticipated. The fight wasn't just a battle of strength, it was a battle of wits. Carter found himself in the thick of it, his spear whirling as he fought with deadly intent. Each movement was precise, calculated, but as the Scolari pushed back, his mind raced. He could feel them adapting to his tactics. They weren't following the expected pattern. This wasn't just an ambush anymore. It was a fight for survival. Thaler, leading his own soldiers into the fray, realized too late what Carter had already sensed: the Scolari weren't reacting, they were planning. They had set a trap of their own. A sharp cry from one of the Valerian soldiers broke through the chaos, and Carter spun around just in time to see a Scolari warrior sink a blade into the side of one of his men. The soldier fell, his face contorted in pain. "Fall back!" Carter shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "Retreat, now!" The soldiers hesitated, confusion flashing in their eyes, but Thaler's voice boomed right after Carter's. "Listen to him. Fall back." For a moment, Carter's heart dropped as he realized the Scolari had the upper hand. They had turned the tables on him, using his own tactics against him. The ambush had failed, but they weren't finished yet. The Valorians weren't ready for a prolonged fight, not like this. The retreat was chaotic. Carter moved like a shadow, pulling wounded soldiers back into the forest, guiding them through the trees with a relentless pace. Thaler, leading the charge, fought fiercely to keep the raiders at bay. Carter was acutely aware of every sound, every footstep, every flicker of movement around him. The Scolari weren't just hunting, they were adapting, learning, and they weren't going to stop. As they reached the edge of the forest, Carter turned to assess the damage. The soldiers were scattered, some injured, some merely exhausted, but all of them alive. They had survived the first wave. But the Scolari were relentless, they wouldn't stop hunting them. "Regroup," Carter called, his voice steady. "We need to get back to the fortress. Now." Thaler approached, his face a mask of grim determination. "What happened?" he demanded. "We had them." Carter's eyes hardened. "They weren't just raiders, Thaler. They were bait. And we walked right into it." His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "They knew we'd attack. They've been tracking us." Thaler's jaw clenched. "You're saying we were set up?" Carter nodded, his gaze far away. "They wanted us to expose our weaknesses. They'll come again, and next time, we'll be ready." But even as he spoke, a cold truth lingered in the back of his mind: they had been lucky to escape this time. Next time, they might not be so fortunate. The retreat wasn't over. They still had to get back to the fortress, regroup, and come up with a new plan. But Carter couldn't shake the feeling that the war had just changed, and they were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The fortress was a refuge, but Carter felt no comfort within its stone walls. He stood by the window, gazing out at the vast, darkening landscape. The sun had set, leaving behind a cold twilight that stretched across the valley. The raiders' attack had left its mark, not just on the soldiers, but on Carter himself. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one darker than the last. The Scolari had caught onto their tactics, but worse, they had used their own plans against them. Every move they made now would be under scrutiny. Their strength, their weaknesses, all exposed. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a game of wits. Thaler's voice broke through his thoughts. "Carter," he said, stepping into the room. "You've been staring at that window for hours. We need to talk." Carter turned, his gaze hardening as he met Thaler's eyes. "What's left to talk about? We've been beaten. The Scolari are learning from our every move. We're not just fighting them anymore, we're fighting against the clock." Thaler didn't flinch. His loyalty to Carter had never wavered, but even he could sense the weight that the human carried. "You've trained us to fight. But we can't fight like this. We need to know our enemy better, and we need to anticipate their moves." Carter paced the room, his boots echoing in the stone hall. He didn't respond immediately. His mind was still racing through their last encounter. Something about the way the Scolari fought had unsettled him. They weren't just mindless warriors, they were adapting, anticipating, like they had been studying their tactics for weeks. "I know," Carter muttered finally. "But we can't play their game anymore. The Scolari are too unpredictable." Thaler's voice softened. "What are you suggesting?" Carter turned to him, his face set in determination. "We need to change the rules. It's time to take the fight to them." Thaler frowned. "That's dangerous. If we go out there again without a solid plan." "We don't have time to wait," Carter interrupted. "They know where we are. They know how we fight. We need to be one step ahead. We'll strike at their heart." Thaler raised an eyebrow. "And how do you propose we do that?" Carter leaned against the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "We'll infiltrate their stronghold. We'll find out everything we can about their command structure, their next move, and we'll eliminate it before they have the chance to strike again." Thaler stared at him for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "That's bold. Risky, but bold." Carter smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Risk is all we have left." The plan was simple in its execution but complicated in its risks. Carter knew the Scolari stronghold was located deep in the mountains, a place where only the bravest, or the most reckless, dared to venture. It was heavily fortified, and the Scolari's elite warriors guarded it. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The Scolari had been studying them, tracking their every move, but they weren't expecting them to come at them from the shadows. "I'll need a small team," Carter said, his mind already working through the details. "No more than 5 soldiers. We'll move quickly, quietly. No noise. We get in, gather intel, and get out." Thaler nodded, his face serious. "I'll gather the team." As Thaler left to prepare, Carter found himself alone once more. The weight of the decision hung over him. This mission could end their war with the Scolari, if they succeeded. But if they failed, the consequences would be devastating. The Scolari had proven they could adapt quickly, and Carter didn't know if they could keep up. But one thing was certain. He couldn't sit back and wait for the next attack. They had to act, and they had to act fast. The team Carter assembled was a mix of the most skilled soldiers in the Valerian army, men and women who had fought beside him from the beginning, each one loyal, skilled, and ready to face the dangers ahead. They moved through the night, a silent unit, blending with the shadows. Carter led them, his every sense alert, as they navigated through the dense forest and toward the mountains. The moonlight cast long shadows, and every crackling branch beneath their feet felt like a warning. The journey was grueling, but they pushed forward. The stakes were too high to falter. As they approached the base of the mountain range, Carter gave the signal to halt. They were close now, and the quiet tension between them was palpable. Each one knew what was at stake. "We're going in at dawn," Carter whispered, his voice low and steady. "We'll move quickly. Stick together, and don't make a sound." The soldiers nodded in acknowledgement. They were ready. The climb was arduous, but Carter kept his pace steady. He knew the Scolari had eyes everywhere, and the last thing he wanted was to walk into an ambush. As they neared the entrance to the stronghold, Carter's heart raced with anticipation. The Scolari would never expect them to infiltrate so deep into their territory. When they reached the cliffside entrance, Carter halted and motioned for his team to crouch low. He examined the layout carefully, noting the sentries posted at key points. The Scolari had left some gaps, but they weren't foolproof. Carter's eyes glinted with determination. They had made it this far, but the real challenge was about to begin. "This is it," Carter whispered. "Stay sharp." The mission had begun. The fate of the Valorians rested in their hands. The moon hung high above, its pale light casting eerie shadows over the Scolari stronghold. Carter's team crouched in the underbrush, their breath steady but hearts pounding. The plan had always been risky, but now, standing on the precipice of their goal, the weight of it felt heavier than ever. It was a point of no return. The stronghold before them loomed like an impenetrable fortress, its walls a silent reminder of the fierce enemy they had been fighting for so long. Carter signaled for his team to move. They crept forward in unison, blending with the shadows, each step deliberate and calculated. The sentries stood guard, their alien forms as imposing as the fortified walls they protected. But Carter's team had trained for this moment. Stealth was their ally. They reached the inner perimeter, and Carter stopped, his hand held high. His fingers twitched as he studied the layout. The Scolari had placed their strongest warriors here, guarding a complex of underground chambers. Carter knew the heart of the Scolari's operations was hidden deep within these walls. If they were to succeed, they needed to get inside without being detected. 5 minutes, Carter whispered, his voice barely audible. "We move in, get the intel, and get out. Fast." The team nodded, and the silence between them was filled with an unspoken understanding. They'd all trained for this, endured the pain of loss and the weight of duty, but none of them knew if they would make it out alive. The first obstacle came quickly, a group of Scolari guards patrolling near a small entrance. Carter signaled to his team, and they dropped to the ground, using the dense shadows as cover. They held their breath as the Scolari passed by, oblivious to the humans just feet away. Time felt stretched, as though the very air was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Every moment was an eternity. Once the danger passed, Carter motioned for his team to move forward. They entered through the underground passage, a narrow tunnel that wound deeper into the heart of the Scolari stronghold. The air was cold, thick with the scent of alien machinery and the metallic hum of unseen power sources. The team moved quickly but cautiously. Carter knew they were nearing the core, but they had to avoid detection at all costs. The Scolari were not known for their mercy. They would show no hesitation in killing anyone who threatened their plans. They finally reached the central chamber. Inside, a massive holographic map projected from the walls, detailing the Scolari's movements, resources, and, most importantly, their future strategies. Carter's eyes locked on the map, his heart racing as he studied the plans. "This is it," he whispered. "We have everything we need. Let's go." But as he turned to lead his team back, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Did you really think you could get away?" The words froze Carter's blood in his veins. His body tensed as he whipped around to face the source of the voice. The Scolari general stood at the entrance, flanked by two of his most lethal warriors. The trap had been set, and they had walked right into it. Surprised, the Scolari general sneered, his glowing eyes narrowing. "You humans are so predictable. Always overestimating your own strength." Carter's mind raced, but he didn't show any sign of fear. His team was positioned around him, weapons ready, but the odds were now stacked against them. "Fight or surrender," the general mocked, raising a weapon of his own. "Either way, you won't leave here alive." Carter's pulse quickened, but his gaze remained steady. He glanced at his team, silently telling them what he already knew. They weren't walking out of here without a fight. And they wouldn't go down without giving it everything they had. "Everyone, stay close," Carter ordered. "We fight our way out." The Scolari warriors advanced, their weapons humming with energy. Carter's soldiers didn't flinch. They were trained for this. The clash of weapons filled the room, the sound deafening as Carter led the charge. The fight was brutal, a whirlwind of punches, kicks, and deadly energy blasts. But Carter was faster, sharper. His mind was clear. Every strike was calculated, every movement precise. He had trained for moments like this, and now was the time to prove it. One by one, the Scolari warriors fell, but the general remained, his presence overpowering. He was a force of nature, his strength unmatched by any of the humans. But Carter wasn't backing down. With a roar, Carter lunged at the general, his fist connecting with a powerful blow. The general staggered back, his expression filled with surprise. For the first time, the Scolari general saw fear in the eyes of his own soldiers. Carter's team was not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something bigger, for their people, for their families, for their future. The general's eyes narrowed, and he charged with a speed that was almost too fast to track. Carter barely managed to block the first strike, feeling the force of it rattle his bones. But his focus was unwavering. He dodged, using the general's momentum against him. With a swift move, Carter disarmed the general, sending his weapon flying across the room. The fight was not over, but it was clear that the tide was turning. "I won't let you win," the general growled, his voice thick with anger. Carter stood tall, his body bruised but his spirit unbroken. "You already lost," he said, his voice calm. "The war is over." The general hesitated, his eyes scanning the fallen warriors around him. The weight of defeat settled in. He knew it was true. He had underestimated the humans. They were resilient in a way that no alien force could have anticipated.